The room fell silent as Joe Biden made his opening remark, calling Hawley's defense proposals reckless. The words hung in the air, as every eye turned to the Missouri senator, waiting for his counterattack. What came next shocked the entire nation. Hawley's face hardened, his jaw clenched tight. He was no stranger to a fight, but this was personal. The camera zoomed in on his steely expression as he shot back with a fire that crackled through the room. Reckless? His voice boomed, icy and unyielding. What's reckless is sitting back while the world falls apart, while our enemies grow bolder and our allies question our resolve. Your failure to act has made America weak. You, Mr. Biden, have failed us. The words hit like a punch to the gut. The audience shifted in their seats. Biden's calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the storm gathering in Hawley's eyes. But Biden was unfazed. His response, though measured, carried the weight of years of experience. Senator Hawley, he began slowly, as if speaking to a child who didn't understand the gravity of the situation, what you call strength is nothing more than bluster. The world doesn't need a bully in the White House, it needs a leader. A murmur spread through the room. Biden's words were like a slap in the face, calculated and precise. But Hawley wasn't done. He leapt to his feet, towering over the podium as he raised a finger to point at the president. This country does not need more speeches. We need action. We need a defense strategy that doesn't hesitate, that doesn't cower. And if you won't provide that, Mr. President, then the American people will have to demand someone who will. The tension was palpable, the divide between them clear. Biden's eyes narrowed, the weight of decades in public service settling into the lines of his face. He wasn't about to let Hawley's accusations go unanswered. But before he could speak, a low buzz filled the room, the sound of something much darker than political theater was about to unfold. But what happened next turned this already intense debate into something much darker. The tension in the air wasn't just personal, it was the weight of a nation's future. National defense, the very foundation of a country's security, had become the front line in a battle for America's soul. The debate wasn't just about military budgets or strategies. It was about America's place in the world. Was it still a leader on the global stage, or was it teetering on the edge of irrelevance? Behind the podium, Biden's calm and reasoned demeanor belied the urgency of the situation. The world was shifting, rapidly. Russia's expansion into Eastern Europe, China's aggressive military posturing in the Pacific, and rising threats from rogue states had all thrown America's military and diplomatic priorities into a whirlwind of uncertainty. The nation was at a crossroads, and the path it chose in that room could either cement its leadership, or signal its decline. Biden knew the stakes. He had lived through enough world crises to understand the fine line between peace and war. For him, the issue wasn't about winning the next election or scoring political points, it was about ensuring the safety and stability of America and its allies for generations to come. The choices made in these debates, these hearings, could set the course of history. Yet, in stark contrast, Josh Hawley was unwavering in his belief that America's military might was its greatest asset, and if it wasn't utilized aggressively, it risked being left behind. For him, the world's threats were not distant or abstract. They were immediate, tangible. He saw weakness everywhere, from the halls of Washington to the streets of American cities. In his mind, America's failure to act decisively, to reassert its dominance, had allowed global adversaries to gain ground. To him, there was no room for compromise, no time for hesitation. With every word Hawley spoke, his message rang clear: America must stand tall, wield its power without apology. Anything less was surrender. But Biden, with decades of diplomatic experience, saw the folly in that. Military might alone couldn't protect the American dream, only smart, measured leadership could. A leader who knew when to strike and when to negotiate. A leader who understood that every military intervention came with its own set of consequences, far beyond the battlefield. And the numbers told the story. U.S. defense spending had skyrocketed in recent years, making up a larger share of the national budget than ever before. But what had it achieved? The wars in the Middle East had drained the country, leaving a hollow victory, with casualties mounting and public sentiment fractured. At home, Americans struggled with economic inequality, crumbling infrastructure, and a healthcare system teetering on the brink of collapse. Could more military spending, more war, be the answer? With the world on the brink of geopolitical turmoil, this debate could determine whether America remains the dominant force on the global stage, or falters in the face of rising threats. The fragile balance of power, once seen as an unshakable pillar of U.S. leadership, now hung in the balance. Biden's response was deliberate, each word weighted with the gravity of the moment. He reminded the room that American power was not just measured in missiles and bombs but in the strength of its alliances, its values, and its ability to lead through diplomacy. Hawley's response was swift and ruthless. "You can't negotiate with people who don't respect you," he shot back, his voice rising. "You can't appease dictators and tyrants. You must show strength. The time for playing nice is over." And with those words, the stakes were set. The nation was now divided, two very different visions for America's future, each one pulling in opposite directions. As Biden and Hawley squared off, both knew the outcome of this argument would send ripples across Washington and the world. The fate of the nation was on the line. The debate had moved beyond politics, it had become a battle for America's identity on the world stage. Josh Hawley wasn't always the firebrand senator from Missouri known for his bold, unapologetic rhetoric. His rise to prominence had been a calculated march, a blend of ambition and opportunism, fueled by a political climate ready for someone who spoke in the blunt, forceful language of power and defiance. Born into a middle-class family in the heart of Missouri, Hawley was the archetype of the self-made politician, an Ivy League graduate who spent years honing his image as the embodiment of American values. A law degree from Yale, an early career in corporate law, and a quick climb to the Missouri Attorney General's office set him on a trajectory few could deny. His early political moves were laced with sharp, almost surgical precision, a calculated attempt to mold himself into the face of a new kind of republicanism, one that could reclaim the party from the hands of establishment elites and return it to the people. Or so he claimed. But beneath the polished surface of his youthful ambition lay an ideological obsession that would come to define his entire political career: military supremacy. As Attorney General, Hawley quickly garnered attention for his outspoken defense of conservative values, free speech, pro-life stances, and, notably, a hardline stance on national defense. The global stage, in his eyes, was not a place for diplomatic niceties or backroom deals. It was a place for power. Raw, unfiltered, unapologetic power. When he entered the Senate, he wasted no time positioning himself as the GOP's most ardent defender of a massive military-industrial complex. To him, strength wasn't just a virtue, it was the only thing that mattered. His speeches were filled with fiery rhetoric against the growing influence of China, the Russian threat, and the proliferation of cyberattacks. He framed these global dangers as existential threats to the very soul of the United States, positioning himself as the man who would restore American dominance. But his language wasn't just about defense, it was about offense, too. Every conversation about defense spending, every hearing, became a rallying cry for escalating America's military might. But as much as Hawley wrapped himself in the flag, his policies, his unyielding thirst for military expansion, were often at odds with the very people he claimed to protect. The costs of his proposals, though not immediately apparent, would hit the American taxpayer hard. The push for increased military spending and a muscular foreign policy would drain the national coffers, cutting into vital social programs, healthcare, and infrastructure, things he rarely acknowledged in his speeches. After all, hawkish policies didn't always pay dividends in the hearts and minds of ordinary citizens, but they sure did keep defense contractors happy. This was Hawley's contradiction: while he wore his patriotism like armor, he often overlooked the needs of those same people he claimed to defend. His rhetoric was a lot louder than his action. It was easier to talk about strength and power than to deliver real change on the ground. His speeches filled the airwaves, but for many in Missouri, struggling with healthcare, student debt, and crumbling roads, his words felt hollow. They didn't feel like they were for them. the contradictions ran deeper. He spoke passionately about American exceptionalism, yet when it came time to address the issues tearing at the fabric of the nation, racial inequality, a broken justice system, the aftermath of endless foreign wars, Hawley's focus never wavered from defense. For all his talk of leading America into a new era, his policies seemed more like a glorified attempt to build a military empire rather than a vision for a more secure and equitable future. His critics couldn't ignore the fact that beneath the veneer of his tough guy image, there was a man whose political ambition was far greater than his concern for the people who elected him. And then there was his unabashed courting of the far right, which made him a polarizing figure even among his own party. Hawley had found a voice that spoke to the disillusioned, the angry, and the fearful. His populist rhetoric rang true for many who felt left behind by the elite coastal establishment. His calls to return to a more aggressive defense posture were as much about building a political base as they were about national security. It was an ideology that was dangerously close to authoritarianism, fueled by a belief that only a strong, unyielding government could fight back against the forces of chaos and decline. But the very nature of his hard-charging persona, the arrogance, the boldness, the unshakable belief that he knew best, was what ultimately made him both formidable and deeply flawed. Hawley's ambition was a double-edged sword. His vision of strength might appeal to the right-wing base, but his approach lacked the nuance and diplomacy that true global leadership demanded. And in a world where the lines between peace and war could shift in an instant, a one-dimensional strategy could be disastrous. Hawley's vision wasn't about strength in defense alone. It was about restoring America's pride, at all costs. But what he didn't realize was that this hard-charging persona, driven by his hunger for power, would ultimately be his greatest weakness in the face of a true national crisis. Joe Biden had always believed in the quiet power of resolve. His rise to prominence wasn't fueled by flamboyant speeches or bombastic displays of strength. It was forged in decades of service, a career that began in the streets of Wilmington, Delaware, and stretched across the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. Biden's story was one of unrelenting commitment, steady in the face of overwhelming odds, grounded in the belief that leadership wasn't about shouting the loudest, but listening the hardest. Biden's career in the Senate began in 1973, when he was thrust into national politics at the age of 29, after winning a seat representing Delaware. From the very beginning, his reputation as a calm, diplomatic voice set him apart from many of his peers. He wasn't the type to grandstand for attention or pander to the cameras. Instead, he quietly worked across party lines, building relationships with people who often disagreed with him, always looking for common ground. It was this ethos of collaboration that would serve him well in the years to come. One of Biden's earliest tests came during the Cold War, when the stakes for America were nothing short of existential. As the threat of nuclear war loomed, Biden worked tirelessly on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, engaging in discussions about arms control and diplomacy with the Soviet Union. While many saw the Soviet threat as one that could only be countered with military might, Biden understood that the real strength lay in diplomacy, navigating the world with a firm hand but a soft touch. He argued for arms reduction treaties, and though his stance was often unpopular in the face of rising tensions, he believed that peace could only be achieved through negotiation and trust. Biden's understanding of national defense was never one-dimensional. He saw the military as a critical component of America's security, but he also understood that an over-reliance on military force risked pushing the nation into conflicts that could escalate beyond control. For him, the strength of America lay not in the number of bombs it could drop or the size of its military budget, but in its ability to lead by example, by showing the world that diplomacy, restraint, and alliances were as vital to security as a strong army. He recognized that every conflict carried a cost, and the true measure of a leader was not in how many battles they won, but in how they avoided unnecessary wars. His leadership style had been tested repeatedly. During the Obama administration, as vice president, Biden was at the heart of several critical foreign policy decisions, most notably, the mission that led to the death of Osama bin Laden. While the mission was a testament to American strength, it was also a reflection of Biden's own strategic mind. While others called for all-out military force, Biden urged caution, questioning the risks of a direct assault. His calm, reasoned approach won the day, and the world watched as the most wanted man in the world was taken down without the kind of widespread destruction that others had feared. Biden's experience wasn't just on foreign soil. He understood, perhaps better than most, the internal pressures that came with decisions of war and peace. In 2009, as vice president, Biden faced the overwhelming challenge of the Afghan war, where the U.S. military was entrenched in a battle with no clear end. The pressure was immense, and the American people were growing weary of conflict. But Biden, drawing from his years of experience in Washington, offered a different perspective. Rather than intensifying the war effort, he championed a shift, one focused on a more strategic withdrawal and a stronger emphasis on diplomatic efforts with regional allies. His approach was measured, thoughtful, and grounded in the belief that long-term peace required more than just military victories, it required building trust and fostering relationships. It was in these moments that Biden's reputation as a steady, calming force in the face of chaos was solidified. When the world seemed on the brink of war, Biden was the voice of reason, advocating for caution, for diplomacy, for the protection of human life over the impulse to strike first. Though critics often accused him of being too soft, of lacking the raw aggression that could win a battle outright, Biden never wavered in his belief that the true measure of strength was in restraint. This belief was tested once again when he took the reins as president. The world had shifted dramatically since his early days in the Senate. The threats were no longer just about tanks and bombs, they were about cyber attacks, economic warfare, and disinformation. But Biden remained resolute in his commitment to diplomacy. In the face of China's growing military presence and Russia's destabilizing actions, Biden took the world stage with a clear message: America would defend its interests, but it would not do so recklessly. The United States, under his leadership, would work to strengthen alliances, focus on shared global challenges, and project power in a way that avoided the traps of endless conflict. Though his critics may call him weak, Joe Biden knew that true strength lay not in military might alone, but in a steady hand guiding the nation through its darkest hours. He had seen firsthand the consequences of unchecked aggression, and his response was always the same: America needed to lead not by force, but by example. He believed that only through unity, dialogue, and a measured approach could the nation ensure its security without sacrificing its values. And so, as the debate with Hawley continued to escalate, Biden knew that his approach, though often misunderstood, was the one that could secure America's future. He wasn't just fighting for military superiority, he was fighting for the soul of the nation, for a future where diplomacy and peace were seen as strengths, not weaknesses. As the stakes grew higher, Biden stood firm, ready to prove that his vision for America's security wasn't just the right choice, it was the only choice. The air in the room was thick with tension. Every word from both Biden and Hawley seemed to carry the weight of a nation's future. What had started as a debate over defense strategy had now turned into a battle for the soul of America. The divide between the two was stark, their ideological differences on full display, and neither side was backing down. Hawley's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Let's be clear here, Mr. President," he said, his gaze locked on Biden. "Your strategy isn't just weak, it's dangerous. It's a recipe for disaster. You're so focused on diplomacy and appeasement that you've forgotten what real strength looks like. We need to be a force to be reckoned with, on the world stage and at home. What we're seeing right now is a lack of vision, a lack of resolve." Biden leaned forward slightly, his face calm but resolute. His response came with the kind of measured precision that came with years of experience. "Senator, strength isn't about saber-rattling or making empty threats. It's about knowing when to act, and knowing when to hold back. You talk about power, but what good is power if we don't know how to use it?" The room went still at Biden's words. The audience was on edge, waiting for the next move. The two men were circling each other now, each staking a claim on the future of America's defense, and it was clear that this was no longer just about military strategy, it was about leadership, vision, and identity. Hawley wasn't finished. "Your obsession with diplomacy and appeasement is what's weakening America. You think the world respects us because we're nice? No. They respect us because we're strong. We don't ask permission, we don't negotiate with our enemies, we confront them head-on. That's the kind of leadership we need right now. Biden's expression didn't change. He was unfazed, but the force of his words was undeniable. You call it leadership, I call it recklessness. You want to escalate every conflict, you want to turn every disagreement into a war. What happens when the dust settles, Senator? What do we have left? More bodies, more destruction, and for what? To prove a point. Hawley's face flushed with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. He shot back quickly. You don't get it, do you? The world isn't looking for a counselor, Mr. President. It's looking for a fighter. We can't afford to be soft when our enemies are planning their next move. You're sitting here, preaching peace while our adversaries are making their moves, and you're letting them get away with it. Biden's voice was steady, but the weight of his words cut through the air. I don't need a lecture on what it means to fight, Senator. I've been through more than you can possibly imagine. But the difference between us is this: I understand that war isn't just something we win, it's something we live with. And once you start a war, you can't simply end it on your terms. The room was on fire now, each exchange landing like a punch. The back and forth had escalated to a fever pitch, with Biden's calm reasoning juxtaposed against Hawley's fiery demands. The political ideologies were clashing, and it felt as though the entire room was holding its breath. Hawley was visibly rattled. He had come into this debate with confidence, certain that his aggressive stance on defense would resonate with the audience. But Biden's steady composure and sharp logic were beginning to pierce through his armor. You're out of touch, Mr. President, Hawley sneered, leaning in as if to challenge Biden directly. You're living in some fantasy world where we can talk our way out of every crisis. The world doesn't work like that. We need a president who isn't afraid to stand up to our enemies, no matter what it takes. Biden didn't flinch. He met Hawley's gaze and leaned back slightly, his voice as calm as ever, but with an undeniable strength behind it. I'm not afraid to stand up to anyone, Senator. But I also know that true strength comes from understanding the consequences of our actions. You want to talk about being a fighter? Well, a real fighter knows when to strike, and when to step back. You'll find that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to keep the peace. The room was tense, the audience on edge as Biden calmly retorted, what good is a strong military if we don't know how to use it? The stakes were higher than ever before. The debate had moved from strategy to principle, and it was clear that neither man was about to back down. The world was watching, and America's future was on the line. The tension was palpable, and the next move would decide everything. The room fell into a hushed silence as the weight of Biden's words lingered in the air. The tension was thick enough to cut through with a knife. For a moment, it seemed as if the very fate of the debate hung in the balance. Then, slowly, Biden stood. His hand slid over the podium, his face calm, eyes unwavering, his mind already at work, preparing a response that would reshape the conversation entirely. Hawley was still seething, his arrogance clouding his judgment. He'd come into this debate with the confidence of a man who thought he could bulldoze his way to victory. But Biden's steady resolve had chipped away at that confidence with every word, every measured response. Now, it was Biden's turn to turn the tide. He spoke slowly, deliberately, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of experience. Senator, I hear you, he began, his tone neither aggressive nor defensive. I hear your call for more military intervention, your demand for power and dominance on the global stage. But what I don't hear is a plan, a real plan, for the consequences of those decisions. Biden paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd shifted, sensing that something important was coming. Hawley, still tense, shot back, you're the one who's naive, Mr. President. You're too afraid to act. You don't want to face the reality that our enemies are getting stronger, and if we don't act now, it will be too late. They don't play by the rules. Why should we? Biden didn't flinch. His response was calm, but there was an undeniable power in it. What good is strength if we don't know how to wield it, Senator? What good is power if all it does is alienate the very people who might stand by us when we need them most? You talk about fighting, but there's a difference between fighting for your country and fighting just for the sake of fighting. The room grew still again, every eye locked on Biden as he continued. What you're proposing, this hawkish stance, this unrelenting push for military escalation, has consequences that go far beyond the battlefield. You talk about confronting China, Russia, Iran, but at what cost? The world is not the black and white picture you paint. It's a delicate web of alliances, fragile partnerships built on trust and mutual interest. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering but becoming even more forceful. Every time we act without thinking, every time we go in guns blazing, we risk destabilizing regions, alienating allies, and throwing the world into chaos. You can't just expect other nations to follow us because we're bigger or stronger. They need to know they can trust us. That's what leadership is. It's not about flexing muscle for the sake of flexing muscle. It's about building coalitions, strengthening diplomacy, and using our power as a force for good. Biden's eyes met Hawley's, and for the first time in the entire debate, there was a flicker of doubt behind Hawley's steely gaze. Biden continued, undeterred by the tension building in the room. And what happens, Senator, when we push too hard? What happens when we stir the pot one too many times and find ourselves on the brink of war? What happens when you've pushed every nation around the world into the arms of our adversaries because we failed to build trust? That's not strength. That's arrogance. The crowd was silent, hanging on Biden's every word. His argument wasn't just political, it was philosophical. He wasn't merely defending a policy, he was defending a vision of America's role in the world, a vision that was rooted in wisdom, restraint, and, above all, humanity. He wasn't trying to prove that he was right. He was proving that his approach was the only one that could secure a future of lasting peace. And let's talk about the costs, Senator, Biden continued, his voice steady but laden with authority. You want to escalate military spending? You want to pour more and more money into defense? How do you justify that when our own people are struggling? How do you justify military buildup while cities across this country lack proper healthcare, while education continues to fall short, while infrastructure crumbles? You don't fix the country by turning every international issue into a reason to spend more on war. He paused, allowing the silence to deepen, the weight of his words settling in. The reality, Senator, is that there are no easy answers. But what I do know is this: a strong nation isn't just about what it can destroy. It's about what it can build. And what I'm proposing, what I've always proposed, is a future where America leads not just with its military might, but with its values. A future where we don't just win wars, we prevent them. For a moment, the room remained silent. Every head turned towards Hawley, whose confidence had begun to fray at the edges. Biden's words had struck at something deeper, something that Hawley, for all his bravado, couldn't quite answer. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Murmurs spread through the room like wildfire, followed by the unmistakable sound of applause, growing louder with each passing second. It was no longer just a debate, it had become a performance. And in this performance, Joe Biden was the undisputed star. The audience was with him, their applause reverberating through the room, a powerful acknowledgement of his vision and his leadership. For the first time, Hawley looked genuinely rattled. His mask of invincibility, the one he had worn so proudly throughout the debate, had begun to crack. He had underestimated Biden, not just as a political opponent, but as a man who understood the weight of leadership. Biden wasn't just winning this debate. He was redefining it. As the applause continued, Biden's calm demeanor remained unshaken. He had made his case, not just for a different defense policy, but for a vision of America that stood above the fray, that led not with threats but with principles. The room had chosen their side, and it was clear that the tide had turned. But as Hawley's eyes narrowed, the tension in the room shifted. Biden had won this round, but the battle was far from over. The aftermath of the debate was nothing short of chaotic. What had started as a high-stakes, political face-off had quickly exploded into a seismic event, one that would echo far beyond the confines of that heated room. The country was buzzing, reeling from the unexpected turn of events, and social media became a battleground in its own right. Biden's calm, methodical rebuttal had shattered Hawley's bombastic approach, and the ripple effects were swift and intense. It didn't take long for the memes to start flooding social media. Within minutes, Twitter was ablaze with hashtags like #BidenWins and #BidenOnFire. Clips of his mic drop moments were shared millions of times, each one amplified with captions like, "When diplomacy outsmarts aggression," and, "Strength is knowing when to hold back." The internet's reaction was nothing short of jubilant. For the first time in a long while, Biden's performance was viewed as a clear, decisive victory, not just in the debate, but in the hearts and minds of the public. The memes, the jokes, and the viral clips spoke volumes. The American people, at least for the moment, were on his side. Commentators on every major network weighed in almost immediately, and the consensus was clear: Biden had not only won the debate but had shifted the conversation entirely. "It's not often you see a sitting president deliver such a decisive takedown," one pundit remarked on MSNBC, still visibly stunned. Hawley looked like a man whose carefully crafted persona had been completely dismantled. He came in as the aggressor, but Biden, with that calm demeanor, turned the tables. "He's the one who looks like the leader now." Political analysts quickly jumped on the growing narrative, pointing to Biden's steady leadership style as the antidote to the raw, chaotic force Hawley had presented. "This was about more than just military policy," another commentator on CNN said. "It was about what kind of leader America wants." The contrast couldn't be starker. Biden is about diplomacy and deliberation. Hawley is about brashness and bold moves, regardless of the cost. In the days that followed, the debate continued to dominate the headlines. Celebrities, political figures, and even former military officials weighed in, sharing their thoughts on who had won the debate. A former general tweeted, "Biden understands the long game. Strength isn't just about war, it's about knowing when not to fight. His approach is what America needs." The #BidenWins became a rallying cry for progressives and moderates alike, a symbolic victory not just for national defense, but for a vision of America that placed values over brute force. But the most significant shift came in the approval ratings. Before the debate, Biden had been facing growing criticism from certain factions of the Democratic Party, accused of being too slow or too conciliatory on key issues. Many had wondered whether the rise of figures like Hawley represented the future of American politics. But after the debate, it was clear, Biden's message had resonated. His approval numbers surged, and polls showed a sharp increase in support for his defense policies. People, particularly those in the heartland and on the coasts alike, felt a renewed sense of confidence in his leadership. It wasn't just about defeating Hawley, it was about reaffirming the values they believed in. For Hawley, the fallout was brutal. His once solid grip on the narrative began to slip. Conservative commentators who had long supported his hardline stance now found themselves questioning his approach. "He came in strong, but he left with nothing," one prominent conservative columnist wrote. "It's clear now, Hawley may be good at talking tough, but when it came to real leadership, Biden showed what it means to think before acting." Hawley's approach to national defense could easily lead us into a disaster. Even some of Hawley's own supporters started to waver. For the first time, his bombastic persona appeared less like strength and more like recklessness. The Hawley brand of aggressive politics had its place, but it wasn't resonating the way it had in the past. People who had once cheered his rhetoric now found themselves questioning whether it was the right path for a nation trying to rebuild its standing in the world. At the same time, Biden's steady rise in approval was coupled with an outpouring of reflection from the American public. In cafes, living rooms, and town halls across the country, people were talking about what they had just witnessed. For many, Biden's performance had been a moment of clarity. It wasn't about the flash of a quick win or the surge of adrenaline from a successful military strike. It was about a leader who understood the cost of conflict, the value of peace, and the importance of diplomacy. The debate had given them hope that America's future was still something worth fighting for, and that it wasn't tied to endless wars or military escalation. But as the dust began to settle, it became clear that the victory was bittersweet. While Biden had scored a major win, the question remained, was this just the beginning of an even bigger battle? As Hawley's team regrouped and redefined their strategy, the looming question of the next election cycle hung heavy in the air. Biden had proven that he could stand tall in a political brawl, but Hawley, along with a new wave of populist conservatives, would not be deterred. The stakes were rising, and while Biden had delivered a momentous blow, the fight for America's direction was far from over. The nation was still grappling with its future. While Biden had proven his strength, his leadership had now been put to the ultimate test. Would he be able to maintain his course? Or would the relentless push from Hawley and others drag the nation back into the cycle of confrontation and division? As the days passed, the world waited to see what would come next. The political storm that had just begun had only just begun to reveal its full force. The dust had finally settled after the debate, but the conversation was far from over. As Biden stood in front of the nation, the weight of the debate's aftermath hung heavily in the air, and he knew the time had come to speak directly to the American people. It wasn't just about the policy differences between him and Hawley, it was about the soul of the country, its identity, its values, and its future. The debate had been a battle of ideas, but now was the moment to reframe that battle, not just for the audience in the room, but for every American watching from home. With a calm yet resolute expression, Biden addressed the nation, his words not just aimed at Hawley's aggressive stance but at the broader question that had been thrust into the limelight: what kind of country do we want to be? National defense, Biden began, his voice steady, is not just about the size of our military or how much we spend on weapons. It's not about flexing our muscles and showing the world how tough we can be. True national defense isn't about flexing military might at every turn, it's about securing peace for future generations. There was a weight in those words, a solemn reminder of the responsibility that came with being the most powerful nation in the world. Biden understood that leadership, true leadership, wasn't about domination or conquest, it was about building a world where peace and diplomacy led the way, not war. You see, he continued, his gaze unwavering, America has always been a beacon of hope, a symbol of strength, not because we've been the quickest to fight, but because we've been the quickest to lead through understanding. Through dialogue. Through respect. His words carried a deep moral conviction that resonated not just with the policy wonks or the pundits, but with the average American. His message was simple but profound: the strength of a nation is not measured by the number of weapons it wields, but by the wisdom with which it uses its power. We are facing threats, yes, Biden acknowledged, his tone becoming more reflective. But the answer to those threats isn't just military escalation. It's the ability to lead, to unite, to bring allies to our side. When America stands at the center of the world, we don't stand alone. We stand with others, in common purpose. Strength is not standing against the world, it's standing with the world. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, the conviction in his words building momentum. We cannot afford to fall into the trap of endless conflict. We cannot afford to abandon the principles that have made us who we are. The world may be changing, but our values, the values that have made America a global leader, must remain constant. Diplomacy. Human rights. The dignity of every human life. These are the things that define us as Americans. There was a powerful shift in the atmosphere as Biden spoke, not just a shift in the room, but across the nation. His words were a call to remember who America truly was at its core, not a nation defined by military superiority, but by the ideals of democracy, freedom, and justice. And it was these ideals that would guide the country through the uncertainties of the future. We face great challenges, challenges that require strong leadership, Biden said, his tone now taking on a more urgent note. But that leadership must be wise leadership. It must be leadership that looks to the future, that understands the consequences of every action, that seeks peace before war. America must lead not with arrogance, but with humility. Not with force, but with wisdom. He paused, his eyes scanning the room, knowing that the path ahead was not easy. There would be more debates, more battles, and more difficult decisions to make. But this was the moment to stand firm in the face of division, to reaffirm what it meant to be an American. For those who would rush into battle without thought, Biden said, his voice rising in resolve, I say this, we do not fight because we can. We fight because we must. But we do not fight every battle. And when we do it with purpose. We do it with clarity. We do it because we know that the price of peace is worth the cost. He leaned into the podium, his eyes locked with the camera, speaking directly to the hearts of millions. America's strength lies not in the wars we win, but in the peace we create. In the lives we protect. In the world we leave for our children. That, my friends, is true national defense. As the words echoed through the room, the weight of them settled into the minds of those who had watched the debate, who had listened to Biden's measured tone and Hawley's fiery rhetoric. It was clear now, this debate wasn't just about military spending or defense strategies, it was about defining America's place in the world. We are stronger together, Biden concluded, his voice softening but no less powerful. We are stronger when we lead with our values. And we are stronger when we remember that true strength doesn't come from dominance, but from the wisdom to seek peace. The room stood in silence for a moment, a collective breath held as the full meaning of Biden's words settled in. His calm, steady leadership had not only won the debate, it had redefined what it meant to be strong. It wasn't just about how loud you shouted or how many enemies you made, it was about how well you could protect your country while respecting the world around you. The moral lesson was clear, the future of national defense wasn't just about military might. It was about wisdom, diplomacy, and the ability to protect peace at all costs. For Biden, this was not a victory over a political opponent, it was a victory for the America he believed in. And as the room finally exhaled, it was clear, the path forward had been set. The question now was whether the nation would follow. As the dust settles from this monumental debate, one thing remains clear, the future of America's national defense will not be shaped by reckless ambition or empty rhetoric. It will be shaped by a vision that balances strength with wisdom, power with diplomacy, and the relentless pursuit of peace with the courage to act when necessary. What we witnessed today was not just a battle between two politicians, it was a battle for the very identity of America. A battle for the soul of a nation that has always prided itself on being a beacon of democracy and justice. Joe Biden's vision for national defense isn't just about protecting our borders, it's about protecting our values. It's about ensuring that America remains a leader on the global stage, not through force alone, but through the strength of our principles, the depth of our alliances, and the clarity of our purpose. Now, more than ever, it's time for us to reflect on what kind of America we want to build. It's time for us to choose a path forward that is rooted in wisdom, collaboration, and the belief that we can lead the world without resorting to unnecessary conflict. If you believe in a national defense strategy that's smart, strong, and sustainable, one that prioritizes peace, diplomacy, and global cooperation, then it's time to join the conversation. Share this video, spread the message, and let your voice be heard. Together, we can shape the future of America's security. Together, we can be the change we want to see in the world. So, I ask you, are you ready to stand with a vision of America that leads with integrity and strength? If so, subscribe, share, and join us in this fight, for a stronger, smarter national defense strategy, and a better America for all.